Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be with you on this very, very cold day. A very warm welcome to our guests from GEM Motoring Assist and the Older Drivers Forum. It's very good to have you with us. I just hope wherever you're watching from, you're nice and snug. I'm certainly nice and warm, even though I am looking out a very frosty field. Anyway, we've got a lot of very nice, rather different topics today to look at, which I hope you'll find interesting. We're going to be looking at private parking firms and how one motorist decided to take his motoring charge all the way up to the Royal Courts of Justice. We'll find out how he got on later on. We'll be looking at the dangers of driving when you're tired. And we're also going to be looking at the really rather frightening increase in car insurances, which is beginning to hit a lot of us at the moment. Certainly it hit me a little while ago. But we're going to begin by looking at electric cars and the safety of electric cars. We're going to be joined by Al Sutty, a motoring journalist of many years standing. Al has been testing cars and writing about consumer issues for 30 years now. He was the road test editor for What Car magazine, and he writes for lots of different publications like Auto, Car, and Honest John, Fleet News, and of course, Good Motoring magazine. Al, very nice to have you with us this afternoon. Welcome to our webinar.
Thank you for having me.
Question to you, quite a simple question. Are electric cars safer or less safe than petrol or diesel cars?
Electric cars are exactly the same as petrol or diesel cars. Well, they are perfectly safe. To be on the road, they have to go through the same process of testing and validation that any petrol or diesel cars had to go through. So they are completely safe. Also, you find that most electric cars now are being subjected to Euro NCAP testing in Europe and similar programs around the world, so affiliate programs to those. So they are as safe as any petrol or diesel car that you can buy.
That's good to know. Now, I have heard that they do have a tendency to catch fire. And of course, we had that electric bus that caught fire about a week ago in Wimbledon. I heard that they're quite difficult to put out the fires when they happen. Is that something to worry about?
There was some worries around electric car fires when electric cars were still quite a marginal thing. But there are now enough of them on the roads, and there's enough statistics that have been gathered that show electric cars are actually about around about for every 100 petrol cars, diesel cars on the road, you'd find it's probably only about 100 petrol or diesel fires. There's only about 5 electric car fires. So they're significantly less likely to catch fire, in fact. The problem with the intensity of the fire with an electric car lies in the battery, because obviously it's a chemical reaction rather than just the petrol and diesel burning off, which tends to burn off quite quickly. Batteries are very dense, and there's a huge amount of energy within those batteries and the chemicals within them. So when they do catch fire, they can burn with incredible intensity and heat, and certainly putting them out can be very difficult. That sometimes involves huge amounts of water and liquid to contain them, or simply dunking the car into a huge vat of water, which is what some of the Scandinavian countries do to deal with it now.
That's what I'd heard, that you needed sort of several fire engines to put the fire out. But I've heard about EV batteries suffering from something called thermal runaway. What's this exactly, and is that something to be concerned about?
It's not something to concern yourself about as an owner and a driver of an electric car. What it is in a similar way to if a petrol or diesel car, if the petrol tank catches fire, if there's a spark there, that initial burst of energy creates an intense heat. With petrol and diesel, it tends to burn incredibly quickly, so you get a huge intensity for a very short period of time. With electric cars, the batteries are very dense, a lot of energy within them and chemicals within them, and they tend to get hotter and hotter, so that the fire can kind of burn for a very long time and stay at a very high heat, which is what causes a lot of the damage with electric cars. Although, as I mentioned earlier on, statistics show that petrol and diesel cars are about 20 times more likely to suffer a fire than an electric car.
Now, because they're so quiet, a lot of people are very concerned that you're not going to hear an electric car coming, and that could be quite dangerous for pedestrians or cyclists. What are we going to do about that?
There were problems with electric cars initially when they first arrived in reasonable numbers on the roads around the world, in the UK as well, obviously. with cyclists and pedestrians not hearing them, and there were certainly a lot of statistics that showed that electric cars were less safe towards those more vulnerable road users. In 2019, it became mandatory for all new electric vehicles to be fitted with an audible warning system. So quite often when you're walking along, you'll now hear this slightly alien buzzing sound as an electric car approaches. That is there to let people know. And it's designed to be as loud as the ambient noise that a petrol or diesel car would make at a similar speed. Electric cars prior to that weren't supplied new with them have to be retrofitted with them. So all electric cars should now have been fitted with an audible warning system.
And that's constant. It's not something that the driver would put on if they suddenly see pedestrians.
It's automatic. So as soon as you start driving, the car will make that noise, and it generally keeps that noise going till about 20 miles an hour, when the ambient noise with the tires and the car passing through the air is the same with petrol and diesel generally.
And you'd hear it that way. Now, is it safe to plug in? These are questions, by the way, that have been sent in for you, Al. Is it safe to plug in the charger when it's raining?
Yes, it is. It's quite a common question, quite a common concern, that, because obviously electricity and water don't mix, but the plugs and the sockets in the charger and in the car are completely safe and isolated from any sort of elements. I mean, even if the car was underwater, you would still be safe. They're tested to destruction.
So that really leads into my next question about driving through water on the roads, bearing in mind all the awful floods that we've had recently. So is it safe to drive through standing water?
It's safe to drive through any sort of standing water that you would in a petrol or diesel car. I mean, there are obviously the same caveats that you would apply to any vehicle, that driving through standing water at speeds, there's the greater risk of aquaplaning and skidding. There's the damage to your vehicle. There's your brakes will need to be checked afterwards, given that little dab to make sure that the brakes are still effective after going through water. And also just driving through anything more than a puddle of standing water, deep water, obviously carries a certain amount of risk with any car of damage to the bodywork and to the vehicle itself. So it's probably, as with all things, a bit of common sense and a little bit of caution.
Another question somebody wants to know is, can charging from a 3-pin home socket cause problems?
Most car manufacturers will have a caveat applied to a 3-pin socket charger that might come with the car. They're generally regarded as a get you out of jail charger. If you find yourself stranded and you have no other option, then you use the 3-pin socket charger. With a domestic socket, they can get quite hot. So that it's certainly something that I wouldn't leave unattended. And it really is something that you may only use for a short period to top up the battery enough to get you to a proper car charger, or a proper wall socket that you might have at home, a 7-kilowatt wall socket at home. The other thing that you really must not do is connect an extension lead to the home socket and then the car into the extension socket, because you're putting more and more strain on the domestic supply, which is relatively low and not really up to charging cars. That's why it can take a very long time to charge an electric car using a 3-pin socket.
Now, a lot of EVs have self-driving technology. Does that mean you can, rather like cars when they come and just let them do the whole thing, is there quite a lot that you don't sort of have to do when you're in an electric car?
No, electric cars are exactly the same as any other car. You have to be in charge. The driver is the person responsible for the vehicle and for the passengers within the vehicle. So you really have to be fully aware, paying full attention. Electric cars, because of the way they're designed, they tend to have a single gear, so that makes life easy. You're not changing gears, so they behave very much like an automatic car. A lot of them also have what's called one pedal operation nowadays, where you can modulate the speed just using the accelerator pedal, the throttle pedal, as it would be called in a car, in a petrol or diesel car, which in a lot of electric cars now, you can actually come right to a stop without touching the brakes. The brakes are there much more as if you have to perform an emergency stop. So you get quite a lot of retardation from the regenerative braking, which obviously recoups energy and saves a little bit of money when you're charging up. And it's a little bit odd sensation to start with, but once you get used to it, it actually makes for very smooth progress, and it saves energy and makes the most of the car's battery range.
Do you have any special tips for driving an electric car? I've never driven one, and I don't think I'm going to anytime soon, but I just wondered, tips for new drivers of electric vehicles.
The main things with electric vehicles to remember is they are still cars. So if you plan to drive an automatic car, then an electric car really is very much the same. There's no immediate noise with them because there's no engine. But then with hybrid cars, a lot of people use the hybrid cars now that pull away with electric power and the engine cuts in later on. So that's very similar to that. What you can find with electric cars is sometimes you have to be quite gentle with your initial input on the accelerator pedal because they tend to be quite quick off the mark. So you do need to sort of just take a little bit of time to familiarize yourself with that so that you can modulate the pedal properly just to creep forward if you're in a tight parking space, or maybe sort of pulling into the garage and that sort of thing.
That's worth knowing. I have read that they're not actually selling quite as fast as they've been in the past few months. Is that right?
Sales have slowed down a little bit for electric cars. There are a number of reasons for that, partly to do with the market has plateaued a little bit for electric cars. A lot of the early adopters and people who wanted them initially, and also during the early part of the pandemic when people seemed to indulge themselves a bit more in cars, that peak has gone now. That's leveled off and dropped down a little bit. Also, we've had very steep rises in inflation, which have caused it. A lot of people are now sitting on their hands with the cars, and also the cost of used cars has dropped significantly and is continuing to drop at the moment. So the actual trade-in value of your car against a new car or a used electric car has fallen back. So a lot of people are now sort of just, I think, sort of sitting back and seeing how the market goes.
So are they still costing quite a lot of money?
Electric cars are more expensive than the equivalent petrol or diesel car, like for like generally, and the prices are coming down, and some manufacturers are working very hard to get price parity. Renault particularly is talking about that at the moment with its new 5, which is a sort of a retro styled car, electric car. So there are electric cars that are coming on the market, and there are companies working to make electric cars more affordable, but it is one of those things. It's taking longer than I think a lot of people had hoped and planned originally, but that's, we didn't plan on a pandemic, which caused a few supply chain issues.
Have you got one?
I don't know, but I do drive a lot of them, and it's one of those things that I suspect the next car in our household may well be an electric car.
Well, Al, thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. We're going to ask you to stay around because we're going to ask you to look at car insurance later on and how that's going up. So we'll be back to you in a little while. We're going to move on now to private parking businesses because they've been accused of using misleading and very confusing signage, very aggressive debt collection, and really rather vast fees for people who've actually got a parking ticket. Now, an industry code of practice came out a couple of years ago, and it was due to come into effect now in 2024. And the idea was that they were going to look at capping certain fines and bringing that down to only £50. Should be already working in 2024. I think it came in about 2017, something like that. But guess what? The parking industry have put pressure to bear, and we're still waiting. Meanwhile, we're going to talk to and welcome retired accountant Stanley Luckhurst. Stanley got a parking charge in a private parking place, and he was very brave. He decided to take them on, and he was actually successful in court. Stanley, welcome. Very nice to have you with us. Now, how did all that start? Tell us the story, and what on earth did you do that drew the parking firm's attention to you?
Well, the story may have ended up in the Royal Courts of Justice, but it started out in a dark and dingy underground car park in Uxbridge about 2 years ago, and I was there on a last-minute Christmas shopping expedition, and I've got a Citroen Berlingo, and I'd driven that into the Excel underground car park just off the Uxbridge High Street, and reversed into a vacant space. and I walked to the pay and display, paid a £1.60 parking fee, and put the ticket on the dashboard. But unfortunately, I had parked in an area that was reserved for contract users because there was a lighting failure and I didn't see any warning signage. A few days later, on New Year's Eve, I got a parking charge notice from Excel, on close inspection, you could tell from the PCN that they'd used flash photography to illuminate my number plate. I went back to the site to take some pictures of my own, and it was still very dark, and the lighting failure had not been repaired. And I wrote to Excel appealing the penalty, and surprise, surprise, they rejected my appeal, and that's how it got started.
So you decided to take it to court. What happened then? I mean, what was the appeal process like? Was it quite a simple one to move into?
Well, no, it wasn't. I think that the notion that the appeal process is independent is an entirely fake notion. I really do. I only agreed to use it because I'd been advised that if I didn't use it, it could prejudice my case if it did go to court. You know, not having had any experience of that stuff before, I listened to what I was advised and I went down the appeal route. Well, the appeal process was done online. It was a long series of back and forth arguments between me and Excel, and my submissions included overwhelming photographic evidence of the lighting failure and the use of flash photography. This went on for about 3 months.
Wow.
And the sheer volume of the exchanges was clearly designed to grind you down. And it became obvious that the adjudication was heading in one direction only. And I believe that the IPC Trade Association is riddled with conflicts of interest, and that the real purpose of the process is to support the parking industry cash cow.
Yes, I think you're probably right, Stanley. Now, it all happened on the eve of your 85th birthday. How long did it take the judge to come to a decision?
Not very long. I think the judge had made up his mind. Bear in mind that by the time I got to court, the bill had racked up to £255. That's what they were trying to recover from me. But I think the judge had made up his mind before the proceedings started. He'd obviously read the Excel witness statements and didn't like what he saw. The Excel paralegal who'd signed the claimant's witness statement didn't turn up at the court hearing, and instead they sent a stand-in legal representative without telling the court in advance, and that seemed to anger the judge, and as an attempt to circumvent the court rules. And he told the judge told the stand-in that she had no right of audience and no right to present the claimant's case dismissed. So instead of winning a claim of £255, Excel walked away with a bill of £306 for my costs, which was
Wow.
primarily for my youngest son, who'd come up from Cornwall to assist me, and we went from there to take some pictures out on the steps.
Now, you probably don't know this, Stanley, but Jem did approach Excel Parking for a comment. They decided not to respond. I don't suppose you're surprised at that.
No, not at all. No.
Did the judge give any, I mean, obviously he wasn't happy with the person who turned up. Did he give any comment at all on the original offence and the validity of your actually pursuing it?
Yeah, then on the one hand, I think the judge wanted to hand Excel a bloody nose, but on the other hand, the lady who'd come to represent them was a very young, probably newly qualified solicitor who'd been brought in at the last minute as a stand-in and perhaps not very experienced in the process. So he had the two of those to balance, and that he did go through the motions of asking the stand-in a few questions about the Excel statement, and his questions went straight to the point of the failed lighting and the flash photography. And he was quite dismissive of the stand-in's attempts to answer the questions, and he made the point that anything she said was only hearsay because she had no right to give real evidence. So
now, you, Stanley, were enormously determined to 3 months you've been battling with this. I think an awful lot of people would really not want to sort of face that. They probably just think it's much easier to pay the fine, no matter how much it is, as quickly as possible. I mean, what advice would you give to people? Would you say, do that, or would you decide to do what you did and just battle on? I mean, there's, you might not have won.
Well, that's a good question, and I think you've hit on the real scandal of just how the parking industry exploits the motorist. And it's all right for old boys like me who've got the time to do the research, challenge the system, but most people just don't have that sort of time. And it's took me a long time to get out of the clutches of the Excel business model. And the unfair penalty notices, the biased appeal process, relentless harassment, and so on. And that's all very distressing to it was to me and to hard-working motorists who've got a job to get on with.
Yes.
So that gets us back to the government plans to launch the new code of practice, and I'd like to just make a few comments on that, if I may. The whole idea of the new code of practice was obviously to put an end to the outrageous charges and bring in a truly independent appeals process. The problem is, as you mentioned, that the code was published in February 2022, and it was quickly withdrawn because industry leaders threatened the government with a judicial review. The government has been kicking the can down the road ever since. Nobody knows when, and that includes the RAC, nobody knows when the new code will be introduced. So we got an impotent government under the boot of a powerful industry lobby pulling in £3.5 million a day in parking charges. From where I sit, the new code looks to be heading for the shelf as the Parliament sort of enters its death throes, and the parking pirates must be laughing all the way to the Jolly Roger Bank. So this is very worrying.
Stanley, do you think this is another task that you might take on? Do you think, to try and lots of letters to the papers and things like that to try and pressure on the government?
I've done quite a bit of that, and I would have liked to have shown you some images, but that didn't work out. And organisations like GEM and the RAC and the AA have a big role to play in beating up the Department of Levelling Up to make sure that that the code gets introduced.
Well, your determination is absolutely fantastic, Stanley. Many congratulations. I think you're right. I think a lot of people would be far too busy to sort of take all that time trying to get off the fine, and of course gets to the court and don't know what the result has been. You were very, very lucky. Many congratulations, and thank you so much for telling us the story. Be careful where you park in future, Stanley.
I will indeed. Thank you very much, Valerie.
It's nice talking to you. Thank you so much. Right, we're moving on now to one of the other items I said we'd be looking at today, and that is fatigue when you're driving, because so many crashes are caused by people who are tired on either motorways or on ordinary roads. And the Older Drivers Forum is very concerned that a lot of drivers are not bothering to look at the highway code and to see what it is that they say about taking a break. And of course, when you don't take a break, the result is that your ability to concentrate is lessened, and that might be when something happens. Now, at this time of year, of course, we've got darker afternoons. We've had all this snow, we've had floods, we've got fog. Driving conditions are really awful. So even if you're not tired, unless you're sort of paying full attention, something might happen. So James Luckhurst, the Good Motoring editor, and of course, Jem's road safety expert, has taken a good look at this. He's made a very interesting film to look in detail about fatigue when you're driving, and how to look for the symptoms, and just what to look for and how to stay safe.
By understanding and proactively addressing fatigue, you can ensure you're always alert on your journeys. By being alert, your brain is able to process the maximum information from the road environment. Fatigue compromises this ability and adds to the risk of being involved in a collision. That's why it's important to avoid driving when fatigued and to be able to identify the signs of tiredness at the earliest stage. You know what it's like to be tired. You know the causes as well. But whatever the cause, you'll find your driving is impaired when you're fatigued. You're slower to react to situations. You have a harder time processing information and can lose concentration more easily. So who's at greatest risk of being affected by fatigue when driving? When and how might you be most at risk from fatigue, and what can you do to reduce the risks you pose when driving tired? Fatigue is more common in younger drivers. However, these drivers also tend to recover more quickly from tiredness. Drivers in their mid-40s and older will need more time to recover from a period of sleep loss. Shift workers will have disrupted sleep patterns, which mean they can become fatigued more quickly. Naturally, night shift workers have the greatest risk of sleep disruption. People with sleep disorders have the quality and quantity of their sleep affected. Research shows that you'll generally experience a reduction in alertness after lunch and will face the greatest risk of a fatigue-related collision between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Your alertness and ability to process information are reduced if you're on the road at times when you would normally expect to be asleep or haven't had enough sleep. Then your ability to process information will be compromised. Alcohol is also a contributing factor to fatigue. The most obvious symptom of fatigue is a reduction in your ability to concentrate and focus on what's going on around you. It'll take you longer to understand information which you would interpret immediately when fully alert. You may also find, especially on a long, dull motorway journey, that you're drifting out of your lane, changing speed without realizing, fidgeting in your seat, or even falling asleep momentarily. Many crashes occur because of the urge to press on, the need to get home or to reach a destination that might just be a couple of more hours away. But when it's late in the day and you've been driving for a long time, then the further you go increases the risk of having a collision. Risks are greatly increased if you combine fatigue with other factors such as speeding or alcohol impairment. Drink driving is particularly dangerous in combination with fatigue because alcohol can affect a driver's alertness long before he or she reaches the legal drink-drive limit. Even a very small amount of alcohol can combine with fatigue to affect your driving. Speed becomes much more dangerous when you're tired and at the wheel. Driving at high speeds when affected by fatigue is a real problem. As a fatigued driver with slow reactions, you would need more time to react to events unfolding ahead. However, the higher the speed, the less time you have to react. As many as 20% of all crashes on motorways are caused by someone falling asleep at the wheel, and about 50% of these crashes result in death or serious injury. This is because a sleeping driver cannot brake or take any avoiding action before crashing. Consider what happens during a microsleep. A vehicle travelling at around 60 miles an hour will have covered 60 meters during the 2-second microsleep. You know the consequences of fatigue, but can you always recognize the symptoms? It's important to remember it's something you can control. How can you improve your alertness if you feel fatigue setting in? The best thing is to start by understanding a few facts about the way your body functions. You have an inbuilt body clock that coordinates daily cycles known as circadian rhythms. Your body clock makes you feel sleepy between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. and then again at between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. It's at these times when you experience your worst physical performance, and so it's no surprise that there's an increase in fatigue-related crashes between these times. You may start a journey feeling fresh and alert, but if you cover a lot of miles, especially at night or when there's very little going on, then fatigue is likely to set in, and that's why taking regular breaks on long journeys is so important. The best advice is to follow the highway code and take a break of at least 15 minutes after every 2 hours or 100 miles of driving. Even if you're close to your destination, it's better to just stop and shut your eyes for a few minutes if you're feeling the effects of fatigue than to push on because you'll soon be there. So what are the symptoms that go with the onset of fatigue? It's important to stress that you won't just fall asleep without any prior warning, and that dangerous levels of fatigue come only after a series of early warning signs. So you should take action on a journey if you find yourself yawning a lot, or blinking, or experiencing an initial drop in your ability to concentrate. Here's our advice for staying alert on a journey. Make sure you get plenty of sleep before a journey. Plan to drive during times of the day when you're normally awake. Don't push yourself to complete a long journey all in one go. Schedule a night stop somewhere rather than pressing on regardless. Avoid driving during times when you know you'll be at your most drowsy. It makes sense to take a break after lunch and to be asleep between midnight and 6 a.m. On a long journey, take a 15-minute break every 2 hours as a minimum. Take more frequent breaks if you feel tired, and make sure they're proper breaks too. Get out of the car, have some fresh air, stretch or exercise a little, even take a brisk walk for 5 or 10 minutes. Don't delay taking a nap. A short sleep of 15 to 30 minutes can make a bigger difference than you realise. But be aware that sleeping for more than 40 minutes can make you feel more groggy and tired as you progress to a deeper type of sleep. If a nap doesn't help, stop for the night. Avoid heavy meals on journeys, especially at lunchtime, as these can make you feel a lot more sleepy in the afternoon. Drinks with caffeine content can help you stay alert, but their effects are not instant. Research shows that taking a caffeinated drink followed by a 20-minute nap appears to be the best short-term measure for combating fatigue. But remember, it's no more than a temporary fix. You may also be able to stay alert by winding the windows down from time to time to get some fresh air into your vehicle. If you're driving, then make sure you're not taking any medications that could make you drowsy. Travel sickness tablets and some cold remedies are examples of drugs that can cause drowsiness. And if possible, share the driving. All these measures could help deal with the effects of fatigue, but it's important to know that the symptoms will just return if you don't give yourself the opportunity for proper, quality rest. Staying in control on the road is based around concentration, observation, and anticipation. Think of a journey as a constantly changing evaluation. You need to take in, process, and understand all the information that's available. And you do that most effectively when you're fresh and alert.
James Luckhurst. Really, really interesting. I learned quite a lot from that. I'm going to watch that again a bit later. Now we're moving on to something that will also affect all of us, and it's car insurance. It rose by as much as 67% last year, according to the Money Saving Expert website. And that increase is going to happen again this year, which is very worrying for most of us. And so let's look with Al again at how we might possibly get round that if we can. So as I said before, we're going to be joined again by consumer journalist Al Sutty. Lots of questions for you, Al, about this. First of all, why is everyone complaining about this increase? What's led to it?
It's a bit of a perfect storm that's led to this huge increase in insurance costs. We've had significantly rising inflation, although I know that's dropping back, but it takes a long time for that to filter through to prices that people are paying. There are supply chain issues post-COVID that have persisted far longer, I think car manufacturers had originally thought. So getting hold of parts to repair cars has been held up. The longer a car takes to repair, it means a lot of people have a courtesy car for a lot longer, and that has an associated cost. There are also other costs, such as for the actual repairer, the garage that's fixing the car. There's the materials have gone up in cost, paint, parts, screws, all the little bits that go into fixing a car. There's the rent of their premises, there's staff costs. So the heating of their building, paint ovens cost a lot to run as well. That's a lot of energy and that's a lot of cost to a company as well. So all those things that come together, all that cost of fixing a car has to be taken up somewhere. And insurance companies, who tend to work on quite small margins on insurance policies and make a small amount on a lot of policies to make their businesses work, that cost has to be passed on somewhere. And unfortunately, that's been passed on to the consumer.
Surely, if I'm having some car work done on my car in the local garage, I mean, my insurance company's not paying for that. I'm paying for that. So why does that affect my insurance?
If you have told your insurer about it, it could possibly affect your insurance, because they will then see you as a greater risk. Insurance, unfortunately, is all based around statistics and the probability of you being involved in an incident. If they think that you're at higher risk and more likely to be involved in an incident, unfortunately, they're going to put the cost of your insurance up to cover their liability.
Oh, it's so complicated, isn't it? Another question, should I auto renew?
It's tempting because it can make life very easy. However, it is always worth shopping around for insurance. Whether you speak to your broker, use a comparison website, or you do the good old-fashioned thing of phoning around a few different insurance companies, it's always worth trying to get a better deal, because sometimes there are quite substantially cheaper deals out there for the same insurance and the same level of cover. One thing I would say is that you should try and do this a good 2 or 3 weeks before your policy is due to run out, because that gives you a bit of time to shop around, a bit of time to think, and also it means you won't be panicking at the last minute and just going with the auto renew as the easy option, and you won't risk driving without insurance.
What are the rules now? Because there was quite a lot, wasn't there, about insurance companies charging less for new customers, and then the customer that's been with them for, say, 2 or 3 years always gets the sort of increase. Is that still happening?
Yes, the penalty for being a loyal customer. Well, from the beginning of 2022, existing customers who renew not just car insurance but home insurance policies too, will pay no more than a new customer taking out a policy for the first time with the same company. So that's now in law, and the Financial Conduct Authority has rules that ban insurance companies from gradually increasing renewals over the period of insurance, so over a period of years, which is called price walking, where they gently increase it so you don't notice it necessarily on the first year or second year, but when you then look back, you can see that your insurance has gone up significantly, and like you say, sometimes as much as about 60%. So although they can increase the cost of insurance in line with changes to the customer's circumstances and their perception of your risk, they can't just put the insurance up because they think we'd like to make some more money.
Now, somebody wants to know, what is the purpose of having a no claims bonus? How does it work? And is it actually worth protecting?
No claims bonus, sometimes known as no claims discount, is a bit of a reward for being a good driver. So every year that you go without making a claim, you build up your no claims discount or no claims bonus, and that it doesn't entitle you, but it generally gets you a small amount off your insurance than if you just gone for the same policy as a new customer, perhaps. So it's a slight loyalty reward as well for insurance companies. But you can take your no claims discount or no claims bonus with you to another insurance policy, so that carries over. So you don't lose it if you switch insurers.
And also, would that sort of impress the new insurer that you actually had, a long no claims bonus?
Yes, absolutely, because it shows you've got a track record of being a safe driver and someone who's not making claims or spurious claims, certainly. You can also protect it, which is a way of, a protected no claims bonus is a little bit like an insurance policy on an insurance policy. So it allows you to maybe make 1 or 2 claims per year without losing your no claims bonus. But again, it's whether you should take it out or not really comes down to how risk averse you are and your sort of perception of how likely you are to be involved in an incident where you might have to make a claim.
Now, big question. Should I do it on the computer, or should I ring up somebody and haggle?
There are certainly lots of price comparison websites which can take a lot of the hassle out of comparing different policies, different companies and different prices. So certainly the internet should be your first port of call. I think once you've narrowed it down maybe to the sort of 2 or 3 quotes that seem to suit you the best, which aren't necessarily always the cheapest either, it is always worth phoning up the companies direct if possible. Not all companies will offer that. Some of them are online only nowadays. It's also still worth speaking to a broker, because sometimes brokers can find policies and tailor policies to you if you have slightly unusual circumstances, perhaps. So yeah, it's always worth just going that little extra mile to try and get a better deal.
I've always preferred to speak to somebody, and I'm going to tell you a little story that the 2 previous years of insuring my car, when the new sort of cost came in, I managed by talking to someone to get it down both years to cheaper than it had been the year before, if that makes sense to you. Last year it went up quite a lot, and I then increased it a little bit more, and I did a 3-year insurance. I'd never heard of that before. Was that something I shouldn't have done? Or was that quite a good idea?
Again, it really comes down to your perception of risk and how you feel about your driving and your liability. If you think that a 3-year deal will work out cheaper, then it's certainly worth looking at, similar to multi-car deals as well. It's very much like any insurance policy. It really comes down to how you feel about risk and liability, and also how the insurer feels about you. A lot of insurers simply won't offer 3-year deals to certain drivers because they feel they're too high a risk.
Haven't got a lot of time left, Al. So, quick couple of questions here. Is a black box policy worthwhile?
For young and new drivers, certainly it's a very good way of proving that you're a safe driver. It does come with certain restrictions. Quite often it might limit when the hours that you can drive, particularly at night, and some places that you might be able to drive, and it might also come with restrictions on the number of people in the car.
We've got 3 cars in our household, all on separate policies. Should we look at a multi-car policy?
Multi-car policy is a very good way to reduce how much you spend on insurance. It can also make it quite easy administratively, because you're only doing it once a year for all 3 cars rather than 3 separate policies. It does depend on who the drivers are. If there are, say it's a family with a young teenage newly qualified driver, it will mean that the 2 older drivers will end up paying more than they would have otherwise done. But then it is also a very effective way for a young driver to start building up their insurance.
Now, another question here. Can you explain fronting? Someone said they were very keen to help their 18-year-old son with his enormous first-year premium by putting his name down, or her name down, as the main driver of his car, but she was told that that was fraud. Is that correct, and why is this?
Fronting is fraud and comes
Wow.
with very serious penalties, up to and including prison sentences for the worst offences.
Wow.
There were about 50,000 incidents of fronting in 2022 in the UK, which ranged from sort of small fines and penalty points right up to some prison sentences. So it is a very serious offence, because you are misrepresenting to the insurance company. So therefore you're getting a financial gain from it by a lower insurance premium than you should otherwise have had. It does sound tough, and I know that young drivers are faced with incredibly expensive insurance at the moment, but it is worth taking that initial pain to build up your insurance for the future. And it also means that if you are involved in an incident, an insurer will be very suspicious if a named driver is at the wheel rather than the main driver. And once those questions start, they can be very difficult to shake off, even if you've been completely honest and upfront with who is the main driver.
Well, that leads us on actually now, Al, to people who don't insure their cars. And we're joined now by Paul Farley from the Motor Insurers Bureau, MIB. And he's here to help us understand why some people don't insure their cars. Is it simply because they can't afford it, Paul, or is there another reason?
Good afternoon. Well, MIB is an organisation now that's been around since 1946, so nearly 80 years, and we've had that problem for 80 years. And of course, throughout that time, of late, we're there to compensate victims of uninsured and hit and run driving. We have about 500 claims a week. That's in the region of 26,000 claims a year. So it's been a problem of quite long standing. I think in relation to the cost of living, though, we're yet to see any increase in claims coming to us. That might be because of a lag, but certainly at the moment it's not something that's troubling us just yet. But clearly we are watching with some apprehension about how that might play out.
But why don't people insure? Is it simply because they can't afford it, or they just think, well, I'm not going to bother?
I think there are several camps really. I think we know that those are individuals that, similar to Al spoken about, who they think their insurance will auto renew and it doesn't. They've insured the wrong car. They might put a wrong digit down in a registration number. So you've got those, if you like, that unintentionally don't insure their vehicles. And at the moment, MIB is supporting a police operation to deal with that, known as Operation Tutelage, where the police write to motorists that are seen on the roads without insurance so that they can check their policies. And if they're not insured, they can go out and get a policy and rectify things that way. But we also know there are a cohort of individuals that intentionally choose to not insure their vehicles. They have quite a relationship with crime and things that are quite undesirable, as you might imagine. Now, in relation to that, the police are doing a cracking job and, in fact, seized in 2023 almost 130,000 vehicles that have been driven by uninsured motorists. That's approximately one every 3.5 minutes, 24 hours a day. And as an organisation, MIB are really at the forefront of supporting the policing, achieving those sorts of numbers.
And what's the penalty? I mean, presumably if you're in a crash, well, that's difficult for the other person who's in the other car, but what's the penalty if you're just stopped and you haven't got an insurance? I mean, are you forbidden from driving for a certain length of time? I mean, how does it work?
Well, in relation, if you're stopped and your vehicle is seized for uninsured driving, your vehicle goes to a police or a commercial compound, and you have to pay quite a lot of money to get your vehicle out, and that vehicle cannot come out of that compound without being insured. So actually you need to go out and buy a policy in its own right. And in addition, the police will also prosecute you. So that would be a fine in the region of £300. 6 penalty points. And of course, in future, when you go to try and take an insurance policy out, you're at the disadvantage of having 6 penalty points, your vehicle being seized by police, and that will disadvantage you. So, our message is always to people, we know it can be tough. We know things economically are challenging, but it's really, really important that you insure your vehicle before you go out on the roads.
So what does the MIB do to help victims, who are involved in a crash with someone who's not insured?
Well, the MIB are a not-for-profit organisation. We are funded by the insurance industry to support victims of both uninsured and hit and run driving. And we know that somebody is hit by an uninsured or hit and run driver every 20 minutes. And very sadly, over one person a day receives catastrophic injuries as a result of an uninsured collision. So we're there as the compensatory authority to make sure that those individual members of the public, those victims, get the right support to try and rehabilitate their lives and get them back, if possible and where possible, to something that they resembled previously. But we know on occasions that that's simply not possible. So there are some real impacts of those that choose to drive uninsured on other people's loved ones. So we're right at the forefront of compensating those victims, and then significantly on trying to really drive that problem down as well.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. I'd never heard of the Motor Insurers Bureau. If somebody's involved in a crash with someone who's, can they find you quite easily? I mean, how do they sort of make contact with you?
Yes, in the event that somebody is unfortunate to be involved in a collision with a vehicle that's uninsured in its own right, or in fact a hit and run collision where the subject driving isn't traced, then you can simply Google Motor Insurers Bureau, the MIB. You will see our details that will come up. We're based in Milton Keynes, and if necessary, that claims process can be followed relatively straightforwardly, either by the victims, their families, or with legal support. There are very wide-ranging options that you can do to get in touch with us. And, we're really keen on helping people and trying to get their lives back on track where possible.
That's really brilliant. Paul, thank you very much indeed. So a big thank you to Paul Farley of the MIB and also our motoring journalist, Al Sutty. Thank you both very much for your contribution. Well, I think there's just time now for a very quick chat to Rob Hurd, who of course chairs the Older Drivers Forum. Rob, I know that you're very keen to offer drivers an update on the highway code. Now, I didn't know the highway code was updated. I thought once it was out there, that was it.
Yes,
So,
actually, about as of January 2022, brand new highway code that got implemented. Biggest changes the highway code we've ever seen. So, Yep, so I'll lead you through our presentation. I'm just going to share with yourselves all about the new highway code. Now, these are the main changes of the highway code. I'm not going to cover everything for you today because we haven't got the time. So what am I going to cover? I'm going to look at what we're going to talk about, the hierarchy of road users, priority at junctions, because this has changed quite a bit. Safe passing distances. Before it used to be quite wishy-washy. Now we've really clarified it in the highway code of who we should give plenty of distance when overtaking. And obviously opening our doors safely, a really important thing. And quite often this is a contentious issue. A lot of people sometimes get annoyed about sometimes cyclists and car drivers and cyclists. So we're going to chat a little bit about that. So first thing we'll look at then is the hierarchy of road users. So unlike before, we weren't really sure who had more responsibility. Now they've broken this down. And this hierarchy has discussed who has the greatest cause of causing harm and who has the greatest risk of being injured. So we know those most at risk would be children, disabled people, pedestrians, cyclists, horse riders, motorcyclists. And then we're looking at those who often have much more likelihood of causing injury and therefore have much more responsibility. We would talk about car drivers, bus drivers, truck drivers, and those sort of things. So when you look at this particular graph, you can see who causes greatest harm and therefore has the greatest responsibility. Their risk to them is the lowest for them, because you can imagine a big HGV hitting a cyclist or pedestrian, often catastrophic injuries as a result. Therefore, pedestrians are our most vulnerable on the roads and therefore have a much more. We, as all drivers and car drivers, taxi drivers, bus drivers, need to take much more care of them, and likewise cyclists, horse riders. So we can see where the level of hierarchy of responsibilities come. Really big key in which the courts will be using in future, and when they're looking at prosecution, they will be looking at where you stand in that hierarchy. And if you have a lot more responsibility, your case could very much be much more a higher penalty for yourselves or higher points as a result of it. Now we're just going to look now at junctions, and there's a nice little video. I'm just going to play you a little excerpt from it from Cycling UK. Just really sets the scene for us.
You walk down the pavement and you're cycling and junctions are the most dangerous places on our roads. But with 14 different highway code rules, it's often really difficult to know who has right of way. Whether you're cycling, driving or walking, it's not always clear who has right of way when someone's turning into a junction, and it causes thousands of crashes every year.
57% of collisions occur at junctions, but when I'm driving, it's difficult to know when I should let somebody cross or if I have right of way.
So previously, the highway code would say that the car driver or truck driver or van driver would have priority against pedestrians when they're pulling into side roads. Obviously, that now has changed. So when turning into a side road, we as motorists should now give way to pedestrians if it is safe to do so. Now, when I say if it's safe to do so, we don't expect you to be turning into the corner and you need to do an emergency stop so the vehicle behind you would go up the back of you. But if it's safe to do so, bring yourself to a safe stop and then beckon them to cross the road if it's safe for them to cross the road. But we shouldn't be basically just taking our priority and just pull straight off. But if there's an opportunity to safely come to a stop and let them cross, they now have priority. So therefore, in this picture here, we wouldn't expect the car driver to be pulling in and basically colliding with the pedestrian. Or if they see that pedestrian coming up to cross the road, they should slow down. If it's safe to do so, they should let them pass. So just as the old rule basically said that vehicles have priorities at junctions, and as you can see here, the new rule is giving way that pedestrians now have priority at junctions, and we should give way to them. Now, when we look at cyclists in relation to that, we also need to bear in mind that if we're driving along a road and we're turning into a side road and we've just overtaken a cyclist or about to overtake a cyclist, then we should be giving way to them. We should be slowing down, letting them pass the junction and then turn in behind them. We shouldn't be cutting them up, overtaking them and then quickly cutting in front of them as well, because their brakes often aren't as good as ours, and also we need to look after them in that hierarchy of road users as we were talking. Now, this leads us on quickly to look at safe overtaking. So when we're talking about cyclists now the old highway code said we should always give as much distance as you would a car. Well, it's changed now. They're now saying that when overtaking a cyclist in a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit, we should give them a minimum of 1.5 meters or 5 feet in a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit. And anything over 30, we should give them more than that. Now, if you want to kind of work out what 1.5 meters is, on an average person, as you see on the photo there, if you stretch your arms out from side to side like this, on an average person, that's 1.5 meters. So imagine yourself driving down the road, about to overtake a cyclist. Make sure you always give that stretched out arms distance before you overtake. And if you can't overtake, you shouldn't overtake in that circumstances. Wait till when you can. Now, they've also clarified in about overtaking horses and horse riders. And what they're saying is that we should give them at least 2 meters or 6.5 feet, but also we should not overtake them any faster than 10 miles an hour. Now, the one thing I always say, if you're about to overtake a horse or horse rider, especially a horse rider, what I would do is slow down behind them and wait for the rider to tell you when's the best time to overtake. Because quite often they know how that horse is behaving at that time and whether it's spooked by something. So give them the opportunity to direct you when to overtake. But when we do overtake, make sure we give ourselves that minimum of 2 meters and travel no more than 10 miles an hour. Because 80% of collisions involving horses and horse riders are down to people traveling too fast or too close. They're one of those vulnerable, and again, we go back to that hierarchy of road users where we have more responsibility to take care over them. Now, when we look at opening doors, they call this the Dutch reach. And it's called the Dutch reach because in Holland, they've got a lot of cyclists and they've implemented this for many years. And it's about how we should open our door. So like a normal car driver, we quite often would use as a driver, use our right hand to open the car door. Now what they're recommending is that we use our opposite hand. So we put our hand over ourselves, open the door, and by doing that, you would naturally rotate like this. So you don't open your door into the pathway of a motorcyclist, cyclist, or pedestrian. And likewise, as a pedestrian, we should be doing the same to them. So again, looking at that hierarchy of road users, we're taking responsibility to look out for those most vulnerable, as in cyclists and car drivers. And you can see that particularly here, if we opened our door into the pathway of this cyclist, they might have to suddenly swerve, and a lot of collisions happen between cyclists coming and colliding with the side of a door. So make sure we give that plenty of distance. Now, the other thing in cyclists, if we often will follow cyclists down the road, and sometimes when we're following a cyclist down the road, we can see them now taking a much more prominent position. And the highway code is encouraging them to do that. Rather than riding close to the curb where there's all the debris and things, they're saying, let's ride right in the center so you have priority. And therefore, people have to give a proper overtake when overtaking. Now, also, you might see that more cyclists are riding two abreast. They're actually allowed to do so. It is something they encourage. If you think about it, it actually takes up less room. And also, it encourages people to give them plenty of distance. So don't be upset when you see people riding two abreast. But that's a real whistle-stop tour. If you want to find out more, then visit our Older Drivers Forum website. And we have a page under our advice tab there. You have a page called the Highway Code. And we go through and we've got a number of videos just to help you through all that as well. So that's just a little bit about all that. So thank you, Valerie, for that.
Thank you, Rob, very much indeed. So important to go out and buy a new highway code. I don't know how much they are. Maybe they're free, which would be good. And the other important thing is that if you want to watch that little video clip, which we didn't get working then, we can see anything you'd like to watch from this webinar again by going to the Older Drivers Forum website, and you can have a look at the whole thing again. So that brings us very neatly to an end, Rob. Thank you, everybody who contributed to this afternoon's webinar. I found it fascinating. I hope you did. We've got some nice ones planned in the year ahead. The next one, I think, is going to be in April, and the theme is holiday. So it's all going to be about driving abroad, and you never know, we might even do it from a ferry crossing the channel. So thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you, Gem Assist, for hosting us today on the Older Drivers Forum. Look forward to seeing you next time. Until now, stay warm and safely drive. Good night. Bye.